Millionaire marries his obese daughter as a bet and is surprised when she proves everyone wrong. This tale takes us into the world of a wealthy man whose bold and unconventional decision to make a life-altering bet turns his world upside down. In this video, we'll uncover how this strange agreement changes the lives of everyone involved in unexpected ways. It was a typical evening in the luxury penthouse where the city's wealthiest elite gathered to enjoy their favorite pastimes: good food, fine wine, and engaging in conversation that hovered between playful banter and competitive rivalry. Among them was Alexander Kane, a well-known businessman with a sharp mind and an even sharper tongue. Known for his wealth, confidence, and ambition, Alexander took pride in his achievements and reputation. He'd built his empire from the ground up, leaving no room for failure, even if it meant taking risks others wouldn't dare to imagine. One evening, as the group exchanged stories and shared jests, the conversation took a surprisingly personal turn. Amid laughter and subtle jabs, someone brought up the topic of family, particularly the responsibilities and expectations tied to parenthood. Alexander was rarely one to speak openly about his family life, especially not his daughter, Emily, a sensitive topic for him. Despite his outwardly hardened exterior, Alexander had a soft spot for Emily, whom he'd raised on his own after her mother had passed away when she was young. Emily was his only child, and despite his flaws, he loved her deeply. But Emily's life had not been easy. While she was kind-hearted, talented, and fiercely intelligent, she had struggled with her weight since childhood. Due to her size, she had faced bullying and rejection, and over time, this constant judgment had chipped away at her confidence. Alexander, despite his love for his daughter, sometimes found himself torn between his protective instincts and the societal expectations surrounding their family. Though he tried to be a supportive father, he occasionally feared that Emily's appearance reflected poorly on him, a feeling he hated to admit even to himself. The teasing among Alexander's friends grew sharper as one of them, after a few too many glasses of wine, jokingly asked, "So, Alexander, when's Emily getting married? Surely you'll find her a suitor who can handle the, family expectations." The comment was meant to be a jest, but Alexander felt a rush of irritation and embarrassment. His friends had never directly criticized his daughter, but there had always been an unspoken layer of judgment about her weight and how that contrasted with the polished, image-conscious world he inhabited. Feeling cornered, he let out a scoff and replied, "Oh, Emily will marry when she chooses. In fact, I'd wager she could find a husband tomorrow if she wanted." This statement was meant to end the conversation, but it only fueled more laughter and sarcastic remarks. "Really?" one of his friends challenged, raising an eyebrow. "Do you honestly believe she'd find someone willing to marry her without a little persuasion?" The room went silent, and Alexander, filled with a mixture of anger and pride, made a bold declaration. "I'll prove it to you. In fact, I'll make it so she has a proposal by next week. I'm willing to bet on it." The words hung in the air, and the men exchanged amused glances, hardly believing Alexander's audacity. They knew him to be prideful, but this was unexpected even for him. The bet had been made. Alexander, usually a man of his word, couldn't back down now, even if it meant placing his daughter's future in a gamble he hadn't fully considered. As his friends toasted, still chuckling and exchanging knowing glances, Alexander felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't planned on making such a promise, especially not about Emily's personal life. But his pride had pushed him forward, and now he was bound to follow through. That evening, After the dinner party ended and the guests had left, Alexander sat alone, the weight of his decision settling over him. How would he approach Emily with this? Would she understand his motivation, or would she feel betrayed? He knew he needed to speak to her as soon as possible. Despite his reputation as a calculated businessman, Alexander felt an unfamiliar anxiety bubbling within him. When he finally gathered the courage to talk to her, he found Emily in the garden, her favorite place to escape the pressures of the outside world. She had always loved the garden, as it was a rare place where she felt safe and unseen, away from the judgments of society. She looked up at her father with her usual warm smile, but as he began to explain his proposal, that smile faded. Emily listened in stunned silence as her father shared the details of the evening, his words tumbling out as he tried to justify his actions. He told her about the taunts, the judgmental glances, and the idea that somehow her life and choices were part of his legacy in the eyes of his friends. Alexander tried to emphasize that his challenge to them was less about her and more about proving them wrong, but he could tell his words were not landing as he hoped. As he explained the bet, her expression shifted from confusion to anger, and finally, to a deep sadness. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her father, whom she had trusted and admired, had reduced her worth to something he could gamble on, a means of winning a foolish bet against his friends. The hurt was written all over her face. "How could you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you really think I'm that unlovable? That my life is just a part of some game?" Alexander, caught off guard, tried to reach out to her, but she pulled back. He could see that he had wounded her more deeply than he had ever intended. "Emily, it's not about you. It's about proving to them that you're worthy, that you're not defined by their shallow standards." She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. "But Dad, you should have never felt the need to prove anything to them, and you definitely shouldn't have used me to do it." The words stung. In his mind, Alexander had been protecting her, but in reality, he had stripped her of her dignity and made her feel like a pawn in a game she had never wanted to play. The conversation ended in silence as Emily turned away, retreating to her room with a heaviness that Alexander felt deep in his chest. For the first time, he questioned whether he had allowed his pride to overshadow his love for his daughter. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she grappled with a torrent of emotions: hurt, betrayal, and even a sense of resolve. She knew she couldn't let her father's actions define her, nor could she allow the words of strangers to shape her self-worth. If anything, this experience opened her eyes to the need for change, not for others, but for herself. Early the next morning, she approached her father. Her voice was steady, though her pain was still visible in her eyes. "I'll go along with this bet, Dad," she said, surprising him. "But it's going to be on my terms, and I don't want you trying to control the outcome. I want to prove to myself that I don't need to fit anyone else's expectations, not even yours." Alexander looked at her, realizing that perhaps his actions had ignited something within her. He nodded, respecting her decision, though he knew the journey ahead would be anything but easy. Emily was setting her own path, one that would challenge not just her, but everything Alexander thought he understood about family, pride, and love. As word of the unusual bet spread beyond the close-knit circle of Alexander's wealthy friends, it quickly became a sensation, drawing in the attention of the media and even sparking gossip within the social circles that once only knew Emily as the reclusive daughter of a powerful man. It seemed that everyone had an opinion on the matter. News outlets painted the story in dramatic terms, with headlines suggesting that the bet was a callous display of a father's selfishness, or that Emily was a victim of her father's ruthless pride. Some commentators speculated that Alexander's motives went deeper than mere bravado, and others were quick to criticize him for failing to protect his daughter's dignity. Meanwhile, Emily found herself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. The private life she had cherished was suddenly invaded, and people who had never met her felt entitled to comment on her appearance, her value, and even her worthiness of love. Her weight, once a deeply personal struggle, became the subject of public scrutiny, and Emily found herself facing an avalanche of judgments from strangers. Friends and distant relatives she hadn't seen in years reached out with opinions and advice, well-meaning or otherwise, and her social media became flooded with comments that ranged from supportive encouragement to cruel insults. In the weeks that followed, Emily faced a dilemma she had never anticipated. Her immediate response was to withdraw, to isolate herself even further from the world. For years, she had built up walls around her life, accepting her place in the shadows where she wouldn't have to face the relentless judgment of society. But now, with so many people weighing in on her life, she found herself unable to escape the harsh glare of the public eye. Despite her initial desire to hide, Emily began to realize that she couldn't let this moment break her. The criticisms hurt, but in a strange way, they also ignited a spark within her. Each disparaging comment, each dismissive remark about her body or her worth, pushed her to look at herself more closely. She found herself asking questions she had never dared to ask before. Why had she allowed herself to be defined by the opinions of others? Why had she, in her heart, accepted a life of self-doubt simply because society told her she was different? And most importantly, why had she let herself believe that she wasn't worthy of respect, love, or happiness? Emily knew that she couldn't change the world's perception of her overnight, but she could change her own perception of herself. It became clear to her that if she didn't take a stand now, this cycle of judgment and self-doubt would never end. And if she wanted to break free from the shadow her father's bet had cast over her life, she needed to redefine herself on her own terms, in a way that would empower her rather than confine her. With newfound resolve, Emily decided to embark on a journey of transformation. She wasn't interested in losing weight to meet society's expectations or to appease those who thought she needed to look a certain way. Instead, she chose to focus on improving her physical health and mental well-being for herself, not to conform to anyone else's standards. She began a routine that combined gentle exercises and mindfulness practices, learning to listen to her body's needs rather than punishing herself to meet someone else's idea of beauty. Each day, she would set small goals, moments of self-care that helped her build confidence, little by little. As the days passed, Emily found herself growing stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. She surrounded herself with people who genuinely cared about her, friends who encouraged her growth and saw beyond the superficial image the media had crafted. Her small support network reminded her of her inherent worth, allowing her to rebuild the self-esteem that had been slowly eroded over the years. Through this journey, she began to recognize her own resilience, discovering that the criticisms of strangers held no real power over her. The more she tuned out the voices of judgment, the more she realized how much she had underestimated her own strength. Her father watched her transformation with a mixture of pride and surprise. Alexander had always seen himself as Emily's protector, yet here she was, taking control of her own destiny in ways he hadn't anticipated. While he had initially seen the bet as a matter of pride, he now began to question his own motives. He watched as Emily blossomed, finding a newfound confidence that made him question everything he thought he had known about her. She was no longer the reserved, hesitant young woman he had always seen. She was becoming someone who owned her choices and rejected the limitations others tried to impose on her. Alexander was humbled, realizing that his attempt to prove her worth to others had ultimately been unnecessary. She had always been enough, exactly as she was. As Emily continued to evolve, the story surrounding the bet also began to shift. Those who once judged her harshly began to see the strength and dignity she displayed in the face of such public scrutiny. People who had initially mocked or pitied her started to admire her resilience, and her journey began to inspire others. Emily's transformation, once a subject of gossip, became a powerful narrative about self-acceptance and inner strength. Yet, despite the praise, Emily knew that her journey was far from over. She was learning that self-worth wasn't about a single achievement or a public show of strength. It was a lifelong process of embracing herself fully, flaws and all. She no longer saw herself as someone who needed to be fixed to fit a certain mold. Instead, she realized that her journey was about honoring herself, her values, and her unique story. This realization allowed her to let go of the pressure to meet anyone else's standards, choosing instead to focus on becoming the person she wanted to be for herself. The public might have seen her transformation as a victory, but to Emily, it was simply the beginning. She understood now that the true challenge wasn't winning a bet or proving herself to others. It was the quiet, daily commitment to living authentically, with compassion and respect for herself. As she continued to navigate this journey, she found a sense of peace and confidence that she had long believed was out of reach. Emily's transformation continued, surprising everyone who had doubted her, including her father. Day by day, she pushed forward with her journey of self-empowerment, turning her focus inward rather than concerning herself with the opinions of those around her. As she grew stronger physically and mentally, her relationship with her father, Alexander, began to change as well. The two of them, once close but strained by misunderstandings and differing perspectives, now had the chance to rebuild their bond. Emily was no longer the shy, reserved girl who blended into the background. She had blossomed into a confident, self-assured young woman who was unafraid to speak her mind, even if it meant challenging her father's long-held beliefs. For Alexander, watching Emily's growth was a revelation. He had always thought he knew what was best for her and assumed his protective instincts were enough to guide her. But now, he realized that he had been blinded by his own pride and societal expectations. Seeing her strength, he began to reflect deeply on his own values, recognizing the limitations he had placed on her, and perhaps even on himself. He had once been so concerned with protecting his family's reputation and securing her future that he hadn't considered the impact of his actions on her sense of self-worth. Emily's transformation was a powerful reminder to Alexander that his love for her should have been unconditional and free of expectations. The public, too, had started to view Emily in a new light. What began as a sensational story about a wealthy man's bet now turned into an inspiring narrative of resilience and transformation. Emily's confidence radiated in a way that made people take notice, not because of her appearance, but because of her presence. She received messages from strangers who felt moved by her journey, people who were inspired by her courage to break free from societal standards and find their own path. Emily's story became a symbol for anyone who had ever felt judged or marginalized, and her journey resonated with those who longed for self-acceptance in a world that constantly told them they needed to be someone else. Despite the praise and newfound attention, Emily stayed true to her purpose. She recognized that her growth was not about proving anything to others, but rather about honoring her own values and goals. She began to share her experiences more openly, attending events where she spoke about self-worth, resilience, and the importance of defining one's life on one's own terms. Her words resonated deeply, especially with those who had faced similar struggles. People who had once dismissed her or mocked her now looked to her as a source of inspiration. Emily found herself humbled by the impact her journey had on others, realizing that her path to self-discovery was helping people in ways she could have never anticipated. Alexander watched her with a mix of admiration and regret. He had come to realize that his initial bet, meant to assert control and prove a point, had been a mistake. He had underestimated her and allowed his own ego to cloud his judgment. One evening, as Emily returned from one of her speaking engagements, Alexander decided it was time for a heart-to-heart conversation. He waited for her in the living room, nervously rehearsing what he would say, trying to find the right words to express the depth of his regret. When she entered, he took a deep breath and began, "Emily, I need to apologize. I didn't see you for who you really are. I let my own pride get in the way, and I put you in a position you should never have had to face. You're so much stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Emily looked at her father, seeing a vulnerability in him she had rarely glimpsed before. She knew that he meant well, but his actions had hurt her deeply. Still, she understood now that his love, though misguided, had always been genuine. "Dad," she replied softly, "I appreciate that you're saying this. I know you thought you were doing what was best, but this journey has taught me that I'm the only one who can decide what's best for me. I had to go through this to understand that my worth isn't tied to anyone else's opinion, not even yours." Her words, though gentle, struck Alexander deeply. He nodded, accepting her honesty, and a weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. He realized that she no longer needed his validation. She had found her strength independently, and he respected her all the more for it. This moment marked a turning point in their relationship, a shift from the controlling father and his dutiful daughter to two individuals who respected and valued one another as equals. In the days that followed, Alexander tried to support Emily in ways that respected her autonomy. He attended her public talks and even joined her in some of her community initiatives, not as a proud father seeking praise, but as a humble supporter of her work. Their bond grew in a way that neither of them had anticipated, and Alexander, for the first time, felt genuinely proud of the woman Emily had become, not because of what others thought, but because of who she truly was. As Emily's confidence continued to grow, she made a decision that surprised everyone, even herself. Rather than continue down the path society might expect, marriage, settling down, fulfilling traditional roles, Emily chose to take time for herself, focusing on her own growth and happiness. She realized that her journey was just beginning and that she had the freedom to create a life defined by her own terms. Through her work, she encouraged others to look within themselves, challenging them to break free from society's constraints and embrace their unique journeys. Her message resonated far and wide, and soon she became known not as the daughter of a millionaire, or as the subject of a sensational bet, but as a woman who had defied expectations and found her own voice. For Alexander, this transformation of his daughter marked a profound shift in his own life as well. He began to question the values he had long held dear, realizing that true success was not measured in wealth or status, but in love, respect, and the freedom to be oneself. Emily's journey had taught him to look beyond appearances and societal norms, to see the importance of embracing individuality and supporting one's loved ones in their authentic paths. In the end, the bet that had once seemed like a foolish decision became a catalyst for transformation, not just for Emily, but for her father as well. Through her strength and courage, she had shown him the true meaning of love and self-worth, teaching him lessons that his wealth and status could never provide. Alexander's surprise at his daughter's journey turned into a deep, abiding respect, and he vowed to continue supporting her with the humility and love she deserved. As Emily looked ahead to the next chapter of her life, she felt a profound sense of freedom. She had faced judgment, challenged expectations, and overcome self-doubt, emerging with a renewed understanding of herself. No longer bound by the limitations others had tried to impose, she moved forward, knowing that her journey was hers alone to shape. And with each step, she carried with her the knowledge that true strength came from within, and that the only approval she would ever need was her own.